Landlord destruction was once central to Labour Party policy, and in this video I'm going to take you through how Labour's history with landlords 80 years ago is staggeringly reaching the exact same tipping point with Sir Keir Starmer's Labour government today, and how the last Labour government wasn't exactly the landlord's best friend either. And in case you're wondering why the hell you should listen to me, well, if you don't know me, I'm William Gale, and I've spent since 2013 building a UK-wide home buying company, nationwide estate agency, and my own personal property portfolio. So not only does that give me access to information you may not have, but navigating the property market is key to mine and my clients' success. So let's get into it. The Labour Party has a long history of fighting landlords. In the early 1960s, a prominent Labour MP, Tony Crosland, wrote, "Private landlordism is not an appropriate form of home ownership in an advanced society." Crosland went on to write, "The landlord often looks on house property simply as an investment to give them a perpetual return with the minimum of expenditure. Worse still, they wield a degree of personal power over their tenants, which can be offensive and intolerable." He wrote that in his 1962 book titled The Conservative Enemy, and importantly, his views were in fact Labour policy after the Second World War in 1945. The party's ambition was to effectively abolish the private landlord through a local authority takeover of rented housing. Basically, landlords would have been forced to sell to the government. How mad is that? So when Clement Attlee's Labour Party won a landslide victory in 1945 with 393 seats, you can imagine how landlords felt in that moment. And I'll go through the seismic change in housing policy that unfolded after, because it is shockingly similar to what Keir Starmer is proposing for us now. Bear in mind, Labour have just won 412 seats, not drastically beyond the 393 seats Labour won back in 1945. So how is 1945's Labour government similar to today's? Well, right now we have a housing crisis of mammoth proportions. The number of households living in poor or temporary accommodation is rising fast. And we have an economy that is growing slower than 5 out of 6 other G7 nations. It doesn't look good, does it? But the parallels with 1945 are incredible. The post-war Attlee Labour government also inherited a housing crisis and an economy in almost total meltdown after the war. Despite this, the Labour government entered power with a policy of dramatically increasing the building of new homes. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? They ended up building 1.2 million new homes after a period of practically no home building over the war. And in 1948, Labour seriously considered bringing the private rented sector under complete public control, but stopped short due to the negative effect it could have had on the wider economy. Instead, it focused on nationalising poorly performing industries and utilities, including things like the Bank of England, coal mining, the steel industry, electricity, gas, and inland transport, so things like the railways and canals. When Labour narrowly lost power in 1951 to Churchill's Conservatives, most of that Labour government innovation ended up being accepted by the Conservatives and Liberals and became part of what was called the post-war consensus. So you can see, looking at that graph, how relatively high levels of home building continued after that government, which lasted all the way till the Thatcher era of the 80s, where we saw a complete reversal. The privatisation of industries, the sell-off of social housing, and a clear decline in house building, as you can see from that graph. This was a big reason why property prices turbocharged after Thatcher got into power, because of a drop in the supply of property and a simultaneous bigger reliance on the private landlord. So look, the purpose of this video isn't to debate which strategy is right or wrong. You're welcome to start a debate about that in the comments below. Don't be shy. But really, I offer this context because right now, with Sir Keir Starmer's Labour government, they have staggeringly similar goals of things like, one, building 1.5 million new homes over the next 5 years. Two, they want to deliver the biggest increase in social and affordable house building in a generation. Three, Labour have already introduced the Renters Reform Bill, which includes things like an end to Section 21 no-fault evictions, the right for renters to have pets, the right for them to make reasonable alterations to a property, to introduce a 4-month notice period for landlords, and finally to bring an end to automatic evictions for rent arrears. And they want to do things like nationalise the railway over the next 5 years, and things like create the Great British Energy Company, a publicly owned energy company in effect. So they are really following this thread of nationalising sectors they feel are inefficient at the moment, or where too much profitability is escaping the working family and making its way to investors' pockets, or even worse, investors' pockets overseas. So are landlords screwed here? Well, yes and no. I'm not going to sugarcoat this for you landlords. I am a landlord. And I honestly believe none of this is a problem if you know what to expect. In my view, the market is clearly just going to become less profitable. So little by little, the profitability of buy-to-let properties will drop, as it has been already for years, as tenants' rights increase and hopefully the supply of property increases. But that doesn't make property a poor investment. It doesn't mean you can't be smart and buy properties to develop or land to develop or buy below market value. It's just going to be harder if you want to buy a generic property on a 75% mortgage and just rent it out. But nonetheless, if you bought a property in 1945, I'm pretty sure you're going to be happy if you still own that property now. The question is, would that investment have been as lucrative as if you had invested in gold or the S&P 500, for instance? And I think in reality, although the Labour Party has often been labelled anti-landlord and the Conservatives pro-landlord, the Conservatives have been screwing landlords for years. So how have the Conservatives already turned the screw on landlords? Well, let me take you through a timeline. In 2016, we had the introduction of the extra 3% stamp duty on second homes. In 2017, Section 24 came into force, removing a landlord's right to deduct mortgage interest as a cost pre-tax. In 2019, the tenant fee ban was introduced, increasing landlords' costs. And finally, there was already a high likelihood of Section 21 no-fault evictions being banned anyway. And as a result, the volume of buy-to-let property had already been decreasing ever since the first of those measures was introduced back in 2016, that extra 3% stamp duty. And the profitability of buy-to-let properties has been steadily dropping for years. So fellow landlords, irrespective of a Labour or Conservative government, you're mad to not expect the property investment market to not get tougher. But importantly, it does not mean the game isn't worth playing. See you in the next video up here.